Hey guys, Randy Shirk, Steve Frymore. Welcome
What's up?
to another episode of Randy and Steve's Outdoor Adventures. We're just going to do a quick recap of our 2020 year, and we're going to start with the elephant in the room, and that is COVID. COVID's affected everything between the way we live our daily lives, how we do our jobs. I don't need to go into detail, everything. So we're going to go through some of the changes it's made to fishing and how we fish and buy tackle and everything that goes along with that.
So, like one of the big things that we've noticed, going with the tournament schedules and everything else was just how packed the fisheries are. Our local lake, Blue Marsh, if you would go over to Blue Marsh and on any given day, all the parking lots were full all the time. Kayakers, bank fishermen, hikers, bikers, whatever. Everybody was getting out, which in one case is a great thing for the future of the sport, but also in the immediate stuff makes it a lot more challenging for the average tournament fisherman.
Yeah, typically we don't see the lake start to pick up with boat traffic until like April. Normally, last winter it was so mild, we were on the lake all winter long, and normally I only start in like the beginning of March, but I was out quite a bit through the wintertime and into spring, and way before it normally gets busy, guys were out, and by April it was like full-fledged, especially with the first part of the lockdown, because all the restaurants were closed. Correct. That was when it was the worst, when everything was closed. There was literally nothing to do. Kids weren't playing Little League, none of that. So it seemed like just everybody was out fishing. And
the way that affects fisheries, especially like a place like Blue Marsh, which is very, very it's a very busy lake. Okay, you can also include Beltsville, Wallenpaupack in there, Susquehanna Flats as well. All our local tournament lakes within an hour to 2 hours, and all that does is just shut fish down because the amount of pressure coming in. So you have to completely change all your tactics. Things that would work standard, like a chatterbait, a top water, a big worm. All that stuff has to be dialed back to the point of, you look at it, it's like, why would a 5-pound bass eat a 3-inch worm? But that's the tactic you had to go with. You had to change things up.
You had to be a little more stealthy too, not just in your bait approach.
Correct.
They were seeing, all the popular stuff, they were seeing it all the time, but you had to be a little bit more stealthy. I noticed that normally, we could idle over a spot and using our side scan and our down scan to see if the fish were there, and normally you could turn back and throw on them. Not this year. It seemed like if you idled over top of them, like once you got into like the season, like in June, July, and onward from there, if you idled over top of them, it seemed like they would either scatter out and kind of get off that spot, or they just simply wouldn't bite.
And at Blue Marsh, that was really bad. When we were in our club tournaments, I noticed the same spots that we fished the week before. If I went over top of a bait pile and there was fish underneath, if I tried to turn around and fish that slow, those fish were gone. So it made techniques like drop shot, where you generally go over top of your spot and it sit there, almost impossible to do at times in the shallow water, which, at Blue Marsh, you're fishing basically 10 to 15 foot. You're not fishing 20, 30, 40 like you do in Ontario.
Right. And then if you're trying to fish, like you said, with a drop shot or any type of vertical approach where you're trying to drop straight down on them, it was hard to do that too. We found it was better if you backed off and made a long cast and kept the boat away from them, stayed off of the trolling motor, unless you have to get on it to adjust or hold.
So along with those packed fisheries, that makes tournament scheduling a lot more difficult, because what we experienced was a lot of tournaments were actually moved back from, say, like we were in April, May, or maybe even early June at some places, and they got moved back into July, August, and September. And that made the tournament schedulings a lot more difficult. Just the Northeast, the BFL Northeast, they canceled the 2 flats tournaments and rescheduled them for August and July up at Cayuga, and at the end of the year, I guess it was again at the flats, but it was in August this time.
Yeah, they kind of condensed everything into that late summer pattern.
They had all 5 tournaments, but they literally fished 2 places.
Yeah, and it affected tournaments at all levels. Our local level, our local lakes did not have their normal late March, early April
Correct.
before our season closes. All those tournaments were canceled.
The Isaac Walton League got moved to October, right?
November 1st.
November 1st, yeah.
And then the pros, early on in the lockdown, normally, they're fishing January, February, March. The pros shut down, and they had a lot of shuffling and rescheduling. The elites fished all the way into October,
they did.
and normally they're done in the summertime. July, August is usually when they're wrapping up.
So along with that was also travel bans. I mean, there were some states, and we're in one right now, which we can't go up and steelhead fish. So if we could steelhead fish, we'd get a video to you, but we can't be in Pennsylvania. We can't leave the state. So, but that was how it was earlier in the year too. Like if you lived in one state, you couldn't go fish a tournament in another state at some times.
Right, unless you were, you could, but you'd had to quarantine.
Correct.
For 2 weeks when you got home, and it's like, well, we both work normal Monday to Friday jobs. We can't go 2 weeks without pay.
So that made it a challenge in itself, and that stuff's still going on. Gear shortages, tackle warehouses. I mean, and as we gotten older, more into tournament fishing and looking for different stuff, Tackle Warehouse has been our go-to place, as most tournament fishermen, I would say, beyond your local places like Susquehanna Tackle. Tackle Warehouse just has everything for you, everything that you need. And if you went on there in March, April, May, even into June, there was times when you didn't get a package for a full month.
Right. The local retailers were shut down. Cabela's was closed. I mean, you could shop online. Same thing with like the Dick's Sporting Goods and stuff. So a lot of people were just shopping online in general and having product delivered. All the box stores were closed.
Yeah, and what ended up happening was Tackle Warehouse was starting to run out on, because all the companies were shut down and there wasn't a lot of trade between countries. A lot of the tackle was shut down, and they just ran out of stuff.
All the supply chains got interrupted, as did with a lot of other things too.
and that's still kind of going on a little bit.
Oh yeah,
it's still kind of going on a little bit, but it's not quite as bad. You can at least get the stuff you want.
You walk into Cabela's right now, like I've seen it worse, but they don't have a full selection. And a couple months ago, it was a lot worse. They've ramped up now, for the holidays, but. They're in that late summer, early fall time. You walked in there, the shelves were like bare.
Yeah. So I mean,
we went to Courtney and I went to Dunham's too.
Yeah.
2 or 3 months back, same thing. They had nothing.
See, I never went out to Dunham's, but you guys are closer. So it's it's one of those things with we had to deal with all these challenges, and along with that, I mean, that more affected me was trying to find a boat at the same time. Regardless of whatever money we got from the government, I was looking to get a boat in the next year or two. This happened. If you guys aren't familiar with purchasing boats, usually the leftover boats from the previous year, usually you can get some of those boats in the spring of the previous year. Well, all the boats of 2020 were sold out by August. There was hardly any leftovers even by fall.
You go to your local marinas, I mean, it's like they have one boat. It's like they have a pontoon, then they might have one bass boat, glass, fiberglass, and they might have like 1 or 2 aluminums. But it was pretty sad. Even like driving around in our area, a lot of people, will sell their little aluminum boats, kayaks, canoes. I mean, all that stuff was really hard to get this year. You didn't see boats just sitting around for sale. Not nearly as much as we normally do anyway, and even a couple people trying to go kayaking with us on the river and stuff, they could not find boats to buy.
And it had nothing to do really with the supply chains and stuff like that, because those boats were already in place before COVID lockdown.
Increased demand.
It was increased demand. There was so many more boats out in the water this year because people had nothing else to do. They're like, well, let's go buy a boat and let's go float around the water, which gets to our whole, again, of pressure. These fish get conditioned to this stuff, and they know when they can hear a prop or an engine running above them. And if they constantly hear that stuff above them, they're going to leave into different places.
Well, in a lot of our fisheries, too, since the beginning of time, they've always seen more pressure on the weekends than during the week. But now with COVID and so many people getting laid off and having to quarantine and people's jobs and their businesses shutting down, it seemed like it didn't matter what day of the week you went to the lake. It was packed every day.
Right. So let's we kind of talked about the challenges of the 2020 season at hand here. So, but along with that, we actually have had a pretty successful 2020 as fishermen. We had to change up stuff. We had to be different. But there was times when we went out and everyone else is scratching their heads, confused, and we're like, "Well, we had a good day,"
A little bit later on, when we started in
Yeah.
the beginning, like I said, we had a pretty successful winter. We caught a lot of fish during the cold water period, not a lot of guys on the lake. But then as soon as March, April came and the shutdowns happened and everybody flocked to the lakes, man, we normally March and April are some of our best months on our local lake around Blue Marsh, fishing that pre-spawn period and whatnot. Man, we struggled. We struggled through March, and then finally into April, the big guy over here figured something out, and we started getting them.
Yeah, and we started using some swim baits and stuff, and I'll tag the video of what we did at Blue Marsh. Caught some big smallies on swim baits early on, and that kind of set us up for the whole year. It almost felt like every time we threw a swim bait on, whether at Blue Marsh or New York or anything, we were going to get fish, and we were going to get good fish too. So that was one of the switches up, because like the typical Ned rigs, the drop shots, Senkos, the typical stuff that we tend to throw. I mean, we don't throw a lot of Ned rigs, but but typical stuff that people threw a lot to get tough to bite fish, they stopped hitting it because they kept seeing it, because everyone knows that stuff works.
I throw a drop shot a lot, typically, especially when things are tough, or you get an extra pressure or post frontal situation. Shaky head, same thing. Jerk bait is usually a staple early on in the year for me when that water's first starting to come up through the 40s and 50s in temperature. And man, none of that stuff worked for me this spring. We had to adapt, and then what we found to be a consistent biter was just slow rolling a swim bait.
Right. So what we when we got into June, we started doing our typical Susquehanna tackle, Schuylkill County Bass Angler tournaments or club tournaments, and Randy actually won Oneida, and that was actually on the pattern that we kept going with. We just upsized our swim baits because we know from previous years that the smallmouth at Oneida will hit big swim baits, the big Kitech swim baits. Randy, would talk about the patterns that you ran on Oneida.
Yeah, I was fishing smallmouth and largemouth at Oneida. So I was starting my day in shallow on largemouths, catching them on top water, around grass and stuff, and then I'd run out offshore to the shoals as soon as the sun got up, and those smallmouths seemed to move up. I don't know why. I couldn't get them to bite first thing in the morning on top water like usual. It seemed like they waited, and they came up for me at like 7, 8 o'clock. So I went out and filled out my limit offshore with smallies on the swim bait, and then they would quit biting for me when the sun would get high, like 10, 11 o'clock. So then I'd be going back to the shallow largemouths and fishing plastics in the thick grass, trying to call up a big largemouth.
Yeah, well, again, I'll tag the Oneida video, what he did up there, and there's some stuff of me, and I basically ran the same pattern as he did, just with a different color bait, and I used an underspin on mine instead of just the typical Okashira head that we've been using. The one thing that did stay same, and this doesn't surprise me because it's just this is what these fish do, but Cayuga, you got 4th in the PA Bass State Championship at Cayuga the week after the Oneida tournament.
Right. It was last week in June.
And they, it's basically the same pattern we keep running, and we can show you the year before the video we made of Cayuga with the same pattern that we ran that he ran at the state championship.
Yeah, I find that Cayuga, it's one of those deals. If y'all have never fished in New York, upstate New York, anywhere, whether it be the Finger Lakes, Oneida, Lake Ontario, in June, it's great. You definitely go try it. But typically when you go to Cayuga in the middle or end of June like that, fish are shallow and they're hitting. And, in my experience, in some of our tournaments that we do, the guys they pre-fish it a little bit too hard. They go up all week, because the weather's nice and you're in wine country. There's plenty of stuff to do, nice sights, weather's good, fishing's good, and I think guys just get a little bit, they go just a little bit too hard before the tournament, and then a lot of times by the time the tournament comes on the weekend, then the fish get a little bit finicky and they get a little bit tight-lipped. So I had some good quality fish located, and I had to just fish slow for them, just slow and simple with plastics. Top waters in the morning and as conditions allowed, but for the most part I was just fishing slow and steady and just picking at them with plastics.
Yeah, and again, you could tell with Cayuga, that changed as the year went on. That also felt the pressure as well, and we also, and like as you said, Ontario, that also changed the pressure as well a little bit, because you went up to Ontario, what, 2 weeks after we won?
No, I went to Ontario. We went in the middle of July with our club, and we did very well.
And we'll tag that video for you guys to check that out as well, right here.
And then I went back up the first week in August. So yeah, it would have been at least 3 weeks later, maybe 4 at the most, and it was totally different. In the middle of July, you could pretty much catch them wherever you wanted to. It's just a matter of there were certain things you had to do to get size. But man, when we went back in the beginning of August, it was tough. We caught some nice fish, but it was tough. You had to really, really work for them.
And I wasn't up there, but from what I gathered from all the information I've seen from all the bass tournaments that were up there, in that mid-July, they were actually kind of in transition. They were done spawning, moving their way out of Chameau Bay out into the big lake. And the river was really rough this year from what people have said as well. But it seemed like once that end of July happened, they went to a true summer mode, and then everyone was drop shotting them. Everybody, every tournament, there was constant tournament pressure up there because of COVID and not being allowed to go to certain places. Ontario was one of the few places where you could actually spread out and have half the lake off limits. You know what I mean? Because of being in Canada.
Right.
Like Ontario is a huge fishery and plenty of room, and guys could actually go and do that.
Well, to your point about Canada, a lot of guys go to Canada to fish,
right,
whether it be for vacation or whatever. A lot of guys in spring and summer are taking trips to Canada, and that wasn't a thing this year. So a lot of those guys just went to New York and fished all the northern lakes, and I think that was another thing that accounted for a lot of extra boat traffic up there.
Yeah, and all the local tournaments that were up there too, that you talked to the guys that were up there, said they were struggling that time of year. And that might be a typical thing that time of year. I don't know.
August is tough.
August is tough
no
in
matter
general.
What, but normally in New York, it's better than here.
But we've been up there for BFLs in early September, and guys were coming in with multiple 20-pound bags. So I think it more to do with the pressure and everything that fishery's been receiving, since everyone's been knowing those big smallies are up there, along with COVID, because people were going up there for vacation.
It was like after the pros were up there. Seemed like after the elites were there, after that it got real tough.
Real tough.
And they whacked them.
Yes,
course.
they did.
Those guys,
they did.
They pounded on them.
So as far as that, and then you actually went later on in the season, once the summer kind of cooled down and fishing kind of got better, and that's the other thing that I didn't talk about here, but around here we didn't get a lot of rain.
No.
So fishing in the summer around here, when you don't get rain,
not after springtime,
it shuts down completely. On Alani, Blue Marsh, all the river, all the lakes, because they're all based around creeks and rivers flowing with water in and fresh oxygen coming in.
Yeah, where we can run our boat here locally to us, they're pretty much all reservoirs. And when you're not getting rain and they're not running any current, it makes the bite tough.
And something that we've noticed, at least on the graph, was that those fish seem to move up into the major creek arm of the Tulpehocken and get away from the boat traffic on the main lake, because the bait still really isn't on that main lake. It's still up in that creek, like at the mouth of the creek.
With all the boat traffic.
With all the boat traffic. So the whole bait pile of lakes have moved because of the boat traffic and the stuff that's going on here. But, we kind of found a little sweet spot there in October where you actually went and won our Blue Marsh Club tournament.
Yeah, we in the we have this period on reservoirs that are drawdown reservoirs, meaning they lower the lakes in the wintertime. It's very common down south, and some lakes move a lot, like Ray Roberts and Sam Rayburn. Some of those lakes down south, they draw them down big time. Our local lake, Blue Marsh Lake, they draw it down 5 feet, which doesn't sound like a lot, but depending on the steepness of the bank, that can expose up to 50 feet of bank or more if it's not a real steep bank. So they have this every fall. They draw the lake down. Usually occurs in October, and usually by like November they're done. It was when we had our club tournament there the last week in October. It was prime drawdown. The water was down 3 of the 5 feet, so there was constant current for about a week. The fish had adjusted to it, and they were on that feeding pattern, and we were able to get a lot of bites. Relative to our lake, it's a big bass lake, so the minimum size is 15 inches. It's 4 fish per person, and if you can catch a limit of keepers on our local lake, that's pretty dang good any day. And I ended up catching a 4 fish limit and a bunch of shorts, just cranking.
Yep, and one thing that we notice when that water is going down, that crayfish bite really picks up. So we tend to use more crayfish pattern style crankbaits, simply because when the water's going, the crayfish have got to move from their haunts of underneath trees and logs and bushes where they are in the summer, as well as a smaller rock, bigger rock of shallow, and they got to relocate to a deeper spot. And those bass look for those crayfish moving around down in the rubble and stuff like that.
Yeah, the crayfish have to move deeper because they're literally if they're shallow, the water's going down. It's kind of like a tide. They have to move. They have to go deeper, and the bass know it, and they wait for them.
Right. So and you won with that tournament. Now we did actually win the Isaac Walton, which was a week later.
Yeah, it was a week later.
It was a week later. And then just like that pattern actually shut off.
It started to go away.
Yeah.
I had weighed in 1 fish on a crankbait, and I had lost 2 others. They weren't totally committing to it like they were the week before. That bite, you could tell it was definitely going away. They would lash out and strike at it and swipe at it, but they weren't, eating it and getting both hooks like they were the week before.
Yeah, that's actually when it switched over to what I was doing with our club tournament, which was the swim bait. The swim bait was actually working for me at the club pretty well. I just kind of ran out of water, with what I was doing because the amount of boats in the water that day. Probably didn't fish some spots I probably should have. But yeah, I actually ended up winning. I actually ended up getting 3 keepers of the Isaac Walton League and losing probably a keeper. Didn't really see it because it was too deep to really tell, but it was one of those set the hooks and it pops off. But at that point they're now in this fall transition. That water completely shut down. They went to a completely alewife bite, which was really in line with using a small swim bait because all the bait in our lake is super small. It's like 3 inches at most.
It really seemed like once they were done drawing that water and the drawdown was over and they stopped running that current, once the crayfish stopped moving, the bass, they definitely got off that crayfish bite and they went back to the bait fish. And as Steve said, our lake has a lot of small bait fish in it. It's a lot of alewives, and when you see them busting on them, they're really small. They're like 2 and 3 inches.
Yep. So, along with that, like I said earlier, I was actually looking to get a boat, and I'll share the walkthrough with the boat right here. I got a 198 double console elite champion with a 225 on it, and I couldn't be happier with it. I mean, it runs great. I mean, I had to put a little bit of work into it, replace the gas sensor, fix a couple little things. I got to put some graphs on it, but all in all, it's a great boat. I really am happy with the purchase, and I got it for a good price. Like I said, when you're looking for a boat, it's difficult right now because there's just nowhere that has used boats. And one of the resources I've been using is Craigslist, and I tend to stay away from Craigslist because there's a lot of fake ads. Like you can look at a boat and the console isn't on the right, and it should be on the right, and all of a sudden it's on the left. You can tell it's a fake. It's a mirror, like almost like a mirror image boat. It's not the right thing.
Legit.
It's not legit. Along with the pricing of sometimes the boats on there, if it's a reasonably new boat and they have it listed for $1,000, it's not a legit boat.
Yeah, a lot of people try and scam people on there and stuff.
Yeah, so you got to be careful on that. But if you really know your stuff, you can actually pinpoint which ones are the legit stuff. I mean, and another one that no one really outside of bass fishing knows, but Bass Boat Central. Mm-hmm. I love just going on there and just seeing the boats for sale. It's all around the country, so you might not have a lot of boats in sale, but these guys are actually guys who take care of their boats. They put the right electronics on, and if you're looking to get into tournament fishing and you find the right type of boat from your area, it might be worth going and looking at. So, I mean, but those are some of the resources I use along with Boat Trader. But again, if you're not seeing boats on Boat Trader, go look at other places because it's you got to use all resources, not just one thing.
Yeah, it's nice to stay up on pricing and what different boats are going for, and this and that. If you are trying to buy a used one, you have X amount to spend. This is and this is kind of what you want. You can wait, kind of for the right one to come along, or if you just not seeing what you want in your price range, then you got to either save more money or lower your expectations a little bit. But it's a nice tool just to see what is going for what.
Yeah, and then you really understand what do you want out of a boat? Are you small water fisherman? Are you big water fisherman? Do you want to do tournaments? Do you want to be small tournaments, just club and buddy tournaments? If you're doing something in a club and buddy tournament, you don't really need anything over 18 foot.
Right, you can go with aluminum.
You can even go with aluminum. Something with an 18 foot with a 150 on it, aluminum or glass would be plenty enough to do a buddy tournament or club tournaments if that's just what you want to do. If you want to do something like what me and Randy want to do, where we want to do a little bit more competitive tournaments, BFLs or other stuff like that down the road, look at something a little bit bigger. But again, if you buy something new, it's going to be over $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. I got mine for about 16, and it has 300 hours on it, but it's actually in really good shape for the age. And you can save yourself a whole heck of a lot of money doing that. You just got to know what you're looking for and do your research.
Yep. So it's, COVID definitely threw us all a curveball, from everything, from fishing to daily life to jobs to everything. And just, what are your alternatives? You have to improvise, adapt, and overcome. And it definitely wasn't all bad. Most of the year, admittedly, was a struggle for us, in a lot of ways, just in the way we had to change in the way we live. I've been working at home since March as opposed to going into the office.
I've been working virtual with my students.
It's taken some adjustment for sure, but it's not all bad. I won 2 club tournaments this year, as we said, Oneida and Blue Marsh. The Blue Marsh one was really nice for me to get. I should have won that tournament last year, but I had 7 keeper fish on last year, and I only landed 2 of them. So that was a sore spot for the last year, so I finally got that monkey off my back. And then Steve and I together won the buddy tournament, the Isaac Walton. Normally it's in the spring, but because of COVID, they had it in the fall this year, and it just so happened it lined up with the one bite that we did actually figure out. And Steve got a boat. Yep. So now, I have my Ranger, and Steve has his Champion, so now we're going to be able to spread out and hopefully learn places faster and gain more information, and also hopefully bring you guys more footage, because now he's not stuck with me when I'm not on him now. He can go find his own fish.
Yep.
So with that, we're going to wrap this up, and the holidays are coming, guys. We just had the election. It's not even totally officially fizzled out yet, obviously, but I believe that better days are ahead.
Most definitely.
They just rolled out they're rolling out the vaccine right now, so hopefully we see some of these restrictions being lifted by some of these states, like our state, Pennsylvania. New York has a lot of restrictions. California, obviously. Hopefully we see other restrictions lift as far as travel between countries. Like hopefully now, you guys that normally go to Canada, you guys can go up there and and do your thing. I know a couple of our buddies that we fish tournaments with, they have houses in Canada on lakes, and even though they have a place up there, they're not even allowed to go. So it'd be nice for these guys to be able to get to their houses, get to their camps, and just, guys that go up on vacation just to go fishing and have a good time. Hopefully we can all get back to some form of normalcy, or at least more normalcy than what we have now.
Yep. So with that, thanks for watching, and keep on fishing.